Today we'll talk about the construction of identity in social interactions, which may be an important area for investigation in socio-pragmatic research. Or in other words, we could say that it's the interactional construction of identity. In the beginning, I'll just share a few views about socio-pragmatics and how it helps us to identify various identity construction processes in pragmatics. Socio-pragmatics primarily deals with social rules of speaking, in which we identify how various participants in an interaction or conversation do share their part in that conversation, and while doing that, they also show their identity, their race, gender, or other markers of social identity, including social class. Therefore, we could say that the making of pragmatic meaning also involves the construction of identity. For example, if somebody wants to be good with a certain company, he would like to adjust his norms, or would like to collaborate with the norms of that particular group or society. And in such a way, use of such collaborative or associated words would mark his identity belonging to that group. Or in other words, we could say that convergence to such certain social norms occur when the speaker indicate a desire to be a part of that community. In other situations, when a speaker is interacting with the members of other speech community or belonging to other cultural society, he would probably will have to adapt to the norms and values of that society or the speakers of that society. In such a situation, he would obviously retain some of the features of his own society also. For example, a Welsh or Irish or even Scottish speaker of English in a typical English society would retain their own features of English language or the speaking of English language when they're communicating to other English-speaking people living in England. According to various social theories, for example, accommodation theory, speakers' choices of indirectness in various social situations also show their social affiliation, or in other words, their social identity. For example, it's a norm to say things indirectly when one wants to convey some unpleasant meaning, or when someone wants to make some request or order. So it becomes a norm to say those things indirectly, simply in order to show politeness. But in other cultures, this may not be a norm. Therefore, by looking at people's patterns of saying things indirectly, we could probably identify their social identity also. All the categories which are used to feature human identities, for example, gender, identity, social class, or other things may be called abstractions. But these abstractions become real or transparent when they are enacted through our choices of clothing, our choices of interacting with people, hairstyles, lifestyles, our postures, and more importantly, our choices about language use. How we use our language actually enacts our identity in one way or in many ways. Word choice, prosody, tone of voice, degree of grammatical complexity, and interactional rules, they mark socio-pragmatic features of one's interaction. Linguistic categories and cues convey and build identities of people who use all those cues. And in other words, we can say that they perform identity. When we make certain word choices and render words in a typical way, we are actually also performing our identity. It's very simple to understand that even in our society, people speaking the same language, for example, let's say Urdu language, a person speaking Urdu language belonging to a Saraiki belt would speak Urdu in a different way, and some way without any ethnic bias or a linguistic bias. We could say that we can identify that he belongs to a certain area. So when people enact a language in a certain way, or they use language in a certain way, they actually enact their identity also. While individuals are likely to use more than one cue to display their identities in doing relational work or doing any talk, it is possible that they may refer to their identity, or they may mark their identity in more than one ways in a certain talk. For example, pronouncing word hot pot in Pakistani rural areas shows involvement of other culture in native accent. For example, in a typical rural setting in a Pakistani village, hot pot is something which is used almost in every house for keeping few eatables warm. So most of the people in rural areas would call it hot pot instead of hot pot. So when somebody says hot pot, so we could understand the identity, or especially the linguistic identity of that person. Interesting to see the enactment of identity in the construction of interactional meaning, and how it can be studied in pragmatics. Overall, where we can sum up this debate is that by our linguistic choices, we do enact our identity, and our various ways of saying something and the words which we use to say that thing actually refer to our identity also.